Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are tuning our amplifiers, checking our cables, and turning the volume all the way up. We're looking at a figure who is practically synonymous with the electric guitar.
I mean, he is the electric guitar for so many people, a man often called Slowhand.
And for a brief, pretty feverish period in the 1960s, he was called something, well, something even more intense.
God. The graffiti literally said, Clapton is God.
That's right. We are talking about Eric Clapton. But here's the thing, and this is why I was so excited to dig into these sources.
Yeah.
If you only know the classic rock radio 8s, you only know, what, maybe 10% of the story?
Oh, absolutely. 10% is generous. The stack of research we have today, it paints a picture that's so much more complex. It's often incredibly tragic, and frankly, at times, it's deeply, deeply controversial.
It really is. We're going to look at the man who is the only 3-time inductee to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We've got biographical breakdowns, deep dives into his specific gear. And yes, don't worry, we will talk about the guitars and amps.
We have to.
And we've got records of public controversies that, well, they haunt his legacy to this very day. So I guess the question is, where do we even begin with a life this massive?
I think you have to start at the beginning. You have to start with the foundational lie.
The lie. Okay, this blew my mind when I first read about it. We're talking about his childhood in Surrey, right?
Right. He was born in 1945.
Yeah.
And Eric grows up believing that his grandparents, Rose and Jack, are his parents. And he has this person he thinks is his older sister, Patricia.
But she wasn't his sister.
No, she was his mother. Patricia was only 16 when she had him. His grandparents were raising him as their own to protect the family from the scandal of it all back then.
And his father, who was his father?
A Canadian soldier named Edward Fryer. He was stationed in England during the war, got drafted and shipped out before Eric was even born, and then just went back to Canada.
Did he ever know he had a son?
He never knew.
Yeah.
The sources say he was a bit of a drifter, a musician himself, actually played piano and saxophone. But he died in 1985, never knowing he was Eric Clapton's father.
And Eric didn't find out the truth about any of this for years.
Not until he was 9 years old. His mother, Patricia, came back to visit with his new half-brother, and that's when the truth came out.
I can't imagine the psychological weight of that. You're a 9-year-old kid, and your entire family structure, the very foundation of who you are, it just dissolves in an instant. Your sisters, your mother, your parents, or your grandparents.
It creates this profound sense of isolation. He talks about feeling like an outsider in his own home. And I think that really drove him toward the blues. The blues is music about pain, about being an outsider. It was a perfect fit for what he was feeling.
So that's the emotional route. And then he finds the tool for expressing it pretty early on. He gets a Hoyer acoustic guitar for his 13th birthday.
He does. And he almost gave up on it immediately.
Why?
Yeah, it was a cheap steel string German guitar. Very, very difficult to play. The action was high. It hurt his fingers. So he put it down. For 2 years.
So what brought him back to it?
Persistence. At 15, he picked it up again, and this is where you really see that obsessive, almost scholarly personality kick in. He wasn't just noodling around.
Right, the methodology. This wasn't just strumming campfire songs.
Not at all. He had a portable Grundig reel-to-reel tape recorder, and what he would do was listen to these old blues records, Muddy Waters, Big Bill Brunsey, Robert Johnson, and he would record himself playing along to them.
So he could hear his mistakes.
Exactly. He'd listen back to the tape, hear where he was going wrong, rewind it, and do it again and again and again for hours until he was satisfied. He was trying to clone the sound, the feel, the very soul of those old Chicago and Delta bluesmen.
That discipline, it paid off incredibly fast. By 1963, he joins the Yardbirds.
And this is really the first time the wider world hears the name Eric Clapton. But it's also the first time we see his, let's call it, artistic stubbornness. His purism.
The blues purist era, that's a good way to put it. The Yardbirds started out playing covers of American blues artists like Chess and Checker, which was right up his alley.
He loved it. But then the band's management started pushing for a hit, for commercial success. And they got one. A song called For Your Love.
Which is a great song. It's catchy. It's got that harpsichord.
It's a fantastic pop song.
Okay.
But that's the point. It is a pop song. It was written by Graham Goldman, who later formed 10cc. He was a professional pop songwriter. To Clapton, this was the ultimate sin.
He felt they were selling out.
Completely. Moving away from the raw, authentic blues toward, commercial pop. He hated it. He refused to even play on the track, other than the middle bridge section.
So what does he do when it becomes a hit?
He quits. On the very day the single is released. Think about that. Your band has its first huge hit, and you walk away. That's making a statement.
That is a serious commitment to your principles.
But before he left, he did the band a massive favor. They obviously needed a replacement, and Clapton suggested his friend, a young session guitarist named Jimmy Page.
Who declined the offer, right?
He did, yeah. Out of loyalty to Eric, he didn't want to take his friend's gig. So Page turned around and recommended his own friend, Jeff Beck.
That is just an unbelievable lineage of guitarists for one band. You trade Clapton for Beck, and then a little later, you get Page in there anyway alongside Beck.
That's staggering. But Clapton moves on. He needs a home that's more musically pure for him. And he finds it with John Mayall and the Bluesbreakers.
Okay, so this is where the legend really starts to solidify. The God era is dawning.
This is it. And a huge part of it is the gear. He swaps out his equipment here, which is just crucial to the story. He moves from a Fender Telecaster to a 1960 Gibson Les Paul Standard.
The famous Beano guitar.
That's the one. And he plugs it into a Marshall JTM 45 amplifier.
Yeah.
And that combination, the humbucking pickups of the Les Paul, pushed through a cranked-up Marshall that created this thick, distorted, sustaining sound that nobody in Britain had really heard before. That became the sound of British blues rock.
And this is the era of the Beano album. Why is it called that?
Well, the album is officially titled Bluesbreakers with Eric Clapton. But everyone calls it the Beano album because on the cover, Clapton is just sitting there, casually reading a copy of the Beano, which is a popular kids' comic book in the UK.
He looks totally disinterested in the photo shoot.
Exactly. It's like he's saying, this is just another day at the office. I'm so cool. I'm just going to read my comic.
Yeah.
It was the epitome of effortless cool.
Ooh.
And while he's playing in these London clubs, his reputation just hits a fever pitch.
This is when the graffiti shows up.
This is it. Islington, North London, 1967. An unknown admirer, a fan, spray paints Clapton is God on a wall.
There's that famous photograph of the graffiti, isn't there?
There is. A photographer named John Varley captured it.
Mm-hmm.
And in the photo, there's a dog. Well, a dog urinating on the wall right next to the words.
Which feels like a perfect, if accidental, metaphor for the nature of fame.
It really does. And for his part, Clapton was apparently mortified by it. He later said he was embarrassed. He wanted to be the greatest, sure, but he knew he wasn't God. But the slogan stuck. It created this mythic persona around him.
And that persona set the stage for his next move, which was, it was huge. The formation of Cream.
The first ever supergroup.
Right. You have Ginger Baker from the Graham Bond organization on drums, a monster of a player.
And a monster of a personality. Then you have Jack Bruce, also from Graham Bond, on bass and lead vocals, another absolute virtuoso.
And then Clapton on guitar, a power trio. They took the blues, cranked the volume to 11, and injected this arty, psychedelic pop sensibility into it. Songs like Strange Brew and Sunshine of Your Love.
They're just on another level. The sheer volume and improvisational firepower of that band was unheard of.
We have to talk about the woman tone. This is a term that gets thrown around all the time with Clapton's Cream era. Can you break down what it actually was?
Yeah, it was a very specific sound he chased and perfected. He was primarily using his Gibson SG at this point, the famous one painted with psychedelic art known as The Fool.
That's an iconic guitar.
It is. He would plug it into a Marshall stack, turn the volume on the guitar all the way up, but roll the tone control knob all the way down. This filters out the high-end treble frequencies.
So it's not a sharp, biting sound.
Exactly. It creates this thick, piercing, but also creamy and smooth sound. It's not harsh. It sounds almost like a human voice singing or like a violin. It's very vocal-like.
Sunshine of Your Love is probably the most famous example of that sound, right? That main riff.
That is the definitive woman tone riff. But even as Cream is basically conquering the world, Clapton is having a bit of a crisis of confidence. And that crisis came in the form of an American guitarist named Jimi Hendrix.
The arrival of Hendrix in London in '66 seems like it was an earthquake for the entire music scene.
It terrified them, all of them. Pete Townsend, Jeff Beck, Clapton. Hendrix came in and was doing things with feedback, the whammy bar, effects pedals, things nobody had ever seen or heard before. He was a force of nature.
There's that legendary story of Hendrix sitting in with Cream.
Yes, at the Regent Street Polytechnic, Hendrix gets up on stage with them and just tears into a version of Howlin' Wolf's Killing Floor.
Yeah.
And he played it with such ferocity and showmanship. Clapton was reportedly standing there just slack-jawed. He said later his hands felt like they couldn't even move. He suddenly wasn't the only god in town anymore.
And the band itself, Cream, was notoriously volatile.
Oh, extremely.
Mm.
Baker and Bruce famously hated each other. They would have these epic fights on stage trying to outplay and outvolume each other. It was musically brilliant, but personally destructive.
And then there was the critical backlash.
This was a turning point for Clapton. A review in Rolling Stone magazine came out, and the writer, John Landau, essentially called their live show boring. He criticized the endless, self-indulgent, virtuoso soloing.
And Clapton read that review.
He did, and it devastated him, because deep down, he agreed with it. He was getting tired of the Guitar Hero arms race.
He agreed with the negative review.
He did. Around the same time, he heard music from Big Pink by the band. And that album just changed his whole perspective.
How so?
He heard that rootsy Americana sound, the focus on the song, the ensemble playing, the harmony vocals, the lack of ego. And he decided he wanted out of the Guitar Hero business. He wanted to be a songwriter, a singer, part of a real band, not a circus act.
So Cream breaks up at the height of their fame, and he tries to disappear into a new band.
Derek and the Dominos.
The name itself was an accident, wasn't it?
Total accident. It was supposed to be Dell and the Dominos. Dell was a nickname for Clapton from his friend Delaney Bramlett. But the announcer at their first gig got it wrong, introduced them as Derek and the Dominos, and it just stuck.
But the intent was clear. Anonymity. He didn't want to be the star. He wanted to be a sideman in his own band.
Right, but you can't really hide when you're Eric Clapton. And you certainly can't hide when you release an album like Layla and other assorted love songs.
Which is arguably his masterpiece, and it is just drenched in personal drama.
It is pure, raw, unrequited love and pain pressed onto vinyl. The whole album was fueled by one thing. Clapton had fallen desperately in love with Pattie Boyd.
Who just happened to be the wife of his best friend, George Harrison.
The ultimate forbidden love triangle. He was writing her letters, calling her completely obsessed. A friend gave him a copy of the Persian story, the story of Layla and Majnun, which is about a man who goes literally mad because he can't marry the woman he loves.
And he saw himself in that story?
He saw himself as Majnun, and Pattie was his Layla. That's what fueled every single song on that album.
And musically, he had a secret weapon, a partner in crime on this record.
Oh, you cannot tell the story of the Layla album without talking about Duane Allman.
Slide guitarist from the Allman Brothers Band.
Yeah. Their producer, Tom Dowd, was also working with the Allman Brothers. He played some of the early Dominos tracks for Duane, and Duane was blown away. By chance, the Allmans were playing a show in Miami where the Dominos were recording.
And they met.
They met, and it was instant chemistry. They stayed up all night just jamming, trading guitar licks. Clapton invited Duane to the studio the next day, and he ended up playing on most of the album.
That high, weeping bird call slide guitar you hear on the song Layla, that's Duane.
That's all Duane Allman. He pushed Clapton and the band to a level they just would not have reached otherwise. It was a perfect, fiery collaboration.
But the tragedy that seems to follow Clapton around is just relentless. The album comes out in late 1970, and initially, it flops.
It was a commercial failure. It was a double album, no picture of Clapton on the cover. The band name was unknown. People just didn't get it. And this rejection, on top of the rejection from Pattie Boyd, it sent him spiraling.
And then the people around him start to die.
It's just awful. In September 1970, just before the album is released, Jimi Hendrix dies. Clapton had just bought him a left-handed Stratocaster as a gift that he never got to give him. Then, a year later, in October 1971, Duane Allman is killed in a motorcycle accident.
It's just too much loss in such a short time.
It completely broke him. Clapton withdrew into total isolation in his Surrey estate, Hurtwood Edge. He spent the next 2-3 years in a deep haze of heroin addiction.
He barely played.
He didn't. He sold his guitars to buy drugs. He famously passed out on stage at George Harrison's concert for Bangladesh. He was a recluse. Everyone thought his career was over.
It took Pete Townsend from The Who to pull him out of it, right?
Yeah, Townsend was horrified by what had happened to his friend. So he organized the Rainbow Concert in 1973. He basically forced Clapton to get a band together and get back on stage, hoping it would reignite the spark.
And did it work?
It worked to an extent. It got him playing again. They helped him get off heroin. But as we know all too well, addiction is a shapeshifter.
He traded one addiction for another.
Exactly. He traded heroin for alcohol. And this really leads us into his solo career era, which is a massive shift in his sound, his image, everything.
This is the 461 Ocean Boulevard era, 1974, a very different sounding Eric Clapton.
Totally different. He's in Miami, he's sober from heroin, and he moves away from the extended blues rock solos. The songs get shorter, tighter, more laid back, more song-focused.
And he has a massive hit with a cover of a Bob Marley song.
I Shot the Sheriff.
Yeah.
It went to #1 in the U.S., and this was huge. It wasn't just a hit for Clapton. For a lot of white America, this was their first real introduction to Bob Marley and to reggae music.
He really helped break reggae to a mass audience.
He absolutely did.
Yeah.
And you have to notice the gear shift here, too. This is just as important. He's not playing the Gibsons as much anymore.
He switches to the Fender Stratocaster.
The era of Blackie begins.
Tell us about Blackie. It's one of the most famous guitars in rock history.
It's a fascinating story. In 1970, he walked into a shop in Nashville, Showbud, and they had a bunch of old, unpopular 1950s Stratocasters for sale for bargain price, like $100 each.
$100, wow.
You bought 6 of them. He gave one to George Harrison, one to Steve Winwood, and one to Pete Townsend. And he took the best parts of the remaining 3, the best body from one, the best neck from another, the best pickups from the third, and he had a luthier assemble them into one composite guitar.
A Frankenstein Strat.
A Frankenstein Strat. And he named it Blackie. That became his main guitar for over a decade. He wrote and recorded Cocaine, Wonderful Tonight, everything on that guitar.
It's amazing to think of these iconic instruments as being cobbled together like that. But while the career is rebounding in the mid-70s, the personal life is... it's still spiraling because of the alcohol.
He was drinking an incredible amount. The sources say like 2 bottles of brandy a day, plus beer and cocaine. He had this deep-seated fear that he couldn't play or be creative without chemical substances. He truly believed the magic was in the bottle, not in himself.
When did he finally get help?
It wasn't until 1982. He finally hit rock bottom and checked himself into the Hazelden Rehab Center in Minnesota.
And even then, it wasn't a straight line to recovery, was it?
No, he had a relapse a few years later. He finally went back to treatment in 1987, and he has been sober ever since. But just as he finds that stability, just as he gets his life back on track, the worst thing imaginable happens.
We're talking about March 1991, the death of his son, Connor.
It is. I mean, it's the defining tragedy of his life. Connor was only 4.5 years old. He was in New York City with his mother, Lori Del Santo, staying at her friend's apartment on the 53rd floor of a skyscraper.
And the window was open.
A housekeeper had been cleaning and had left a large floor-level window open to air the room out. Connor, just being a little boy, ran past and fell. 53 floors.
I can't even begin to imagine that. The sources say Clapton was just minutes away from picking him up for a trip to the zoo.
He was. He arrived at the scene shortly after it happened. He described the feeling in his autobiography as going off the edge of the world. He said he felt like he had walked into someone else's life. Just total protective dissociation.
And in that moment of absolute unimaginable darkness, who's one of the first people to reach out?
Keith Richards. He was one of the first people to offer condolences. And Keith knew that specific pain because he had lost his own infant son, Tara, back in 1976. He knew what that was like.
And instead of relapsing into drink or drugs, which I think everyone would have understood and feared, he poured it into the music.
He wrote Tears in Heaven. He wrote it with the lyricist Will Jennings. And it wasn't originally meant for public consumption at all. It was just a letter to his son, a way to process the grief, to ask that question, would you know my name if I saw you in heaven?
And that song, along with the entire Unplugged album it appeared on, became this massive cultural phenomenon.
Unplugged was huge. It showed this raw, vulnerable side of Clapton. He played an acoustic, slowed-down version of Layla, and by stripping away all the wailing electric guitars, you were left with just the bare, painful lyrics of unrequited love. It was heartbreaking.
And it swept the Grammys.
It did. Record of the Year, Song of the Year for Tears in Heaven. It was this incredible artistic and commercial validation, but it was born from the most terrible loss a person can endure.
And he turned that loss into something tangible and positive with the Crossroads Center.
Yeah, in Antigua. Having finally gotten sober himself, he wanted to help others. So he founded a world-class, affordable rehab facility. And to fund it, he made a huge personal sacrifice. He decided to auction off his guitars.
Including Blackie.
Including Blackie. In 2004, it sold for nearly $1 million at Christie's auction house. All the proceeds went to the Crossroads Center. He literally sold the tools of his trade, the instruments that made him a legend, to help others fight the same demons that had plagued him for so long.
That's a really powerful arc of redemption. But, and this is the deep dive part of the show, we can't tell this story honestly without looking at the other side of the coin. Because there are moments in Clapton's life and career that are much, much harder to reconcile.
Yeah. We have to talk about Birmingham, 1976.
This is an incident that has quite rightly shadowed him for decades. What happened on that stage?
He was performing in Birmingham, England. He was, by his own admission, extremely drunk. This was during the height of his alcoholism. And between songs, he went on a tirade. He stopped the show and started voicing his support for the right-wing politician Enoch Powell.
Powell, who was infamous for his anti-immigration Rivers of Blood speech.
Exactly. And Clapton didn't just support him. The quotes are pretty horrific. He used racial slurs. He shouted phrases like, "Keep Britain white." He told people in the audience that if they were foreigners, they should leave the country.
It is just shocking, especially coming from a man who built his entire career, his entire identity on the music of Black American bluesmen. He worshipped Muddy Waters and Robert Johnson, yet he's on a stage shouting this.
That is the great glaring contradiction at the heart of it, and the reaction at the time was immediate and fierce. That incident actually sparked the formation of the Rock Against Racism movement in the UK.
How has he explained this over the years? Has he apologized?
It's been messy. For a long time, he just blamed the drink and drugs. He said he was deliberately oblivious to racial conflict. But later in life, he did express deep shame. He called his past self semi-racist and admitted he had a habit of sabotaging everything he got involved with. He called his comments chauvinistic and fascistic.
But these kinds of controversies aren't just ancient history from the 70s. We saw some of this resurface pretty recently during the COVID-19 pandemic.
We certainly did. Clapton took a very strong and very public anti-lockdown stance. He collaborated with Van Morrison on a song called Stand and Deliver, which was extremely critical of the government restrictions.
And he was also very vocal about his skepticism of the vaccines.
He was. He claimed he had severe side effects after taking the AstraZeneca vaccine. Now, some context here is important. Clapton already suffers from a condition called peripheral neuropathy, which is nerve damage that causes severe pain in the hands and feet. He felt the vaccine made that condition much worse.
But he went further than just sharing his personal medical experience, didn't he?
Yes, he released another protest song called This Has Gotta Stop, with an animated video that criticized what he saw as the erosion of civil liberties. And then he made a public declaration that he would refuse to play at any venue that required proof of vaccination for entry.
Which alienated a lot of his fans all over again.
It did. It alienated many fans who saw him as moving into conspiracy theory territory and being irresponsible during a public health crisis.
It really complicates the legacy, doesn't it? You have the man who auctions his guitars for a rehab center, the healer who wrote Tears in Heaven, and you have the provocateur shouting on stage in Birmingham and aligning with the anti-vax movement.
It absolutely does. And when we try to assess his legacy, we really do have to look at the musician versus the myth.
The myth is huge. Clapton is God, the original guitar hero.
You can make a strong case for that. The Guardian newspaper once credited him with literally creating the cult of the guitar hero. Before Clapton, guitarists in England were like Hank Marvin of the Shadows, very clean, very polite in the background. Clapton made the guitar visceral, loud, aggressive, and front and center.
But not everyone agrees he's the greatest. There are dissenting voices.
Oh, for sure. There's a famous and very harsh assessment from the veteran music critic Robert Christgau. He called Clapton a promiscuous sideman and said that for an artist of his stature, his discography is remarkably undistinguished.
Promiscuous sideman, that is a burn. But then you look at who he influenced. Eddie Van Halen, Brian May, Slash. The list is endless.
You cannot deny the influence, and the collaborations speak for themselves. I mean,
Right.
He played the iconic guitar solo on the Beatles, While My Guitar Gently Weeps, as a favor to George Harrison.
A Beatle asking you to play on their record. That's the ultimate validation.
It is. And he made a Grammy-winning album with B.B. King, Riding with the King. He championed and worked with one of his own heroes, J.J. Cale. The greatest of the greats wanted to play with him.
And all that success has certainly paid off. We touched on the gear, but the man likes his cars too.
Oh, he loves his Ferraris. He's a massive collector. He even had Ferrari build him a one-of-a-kind custom model, the SP12EC. The EC stands for Eric Clapton. It cost him almost $5 million.
That must be nice. Okay, so we've covered the blues, purism, the supergroups, the unimaginable tragedies, the addiction, the racism, the redemption, the controversies, and the Ferraris. What is the synthesis here? How do we hold all of these conflicting pieces in our heads at once?
I think Clapton represents the ultimate dichotomy of that classic rock star era. On one hand, you have a man who could channel the deepest, most universal human emotions, grief, longing, love, despair, through six strings better than almost anyone who has ever lived. He gave us a new vocabulary for the electric guitar.
But on the other hand,
you have a man who often struggled mightily to navigate his own life and his own flaws. He was, as he put it himself, often deliberately oblivious. He could be self-destructive, hurtful, and deeply offensive.
It really brings up that eternal, difficult question. Can you separate the art from the artist? Can the man who wrote the gentle, healing, universal notes of Tears in Heaven be reconciled with the man shouting racist bile on that stage in Birmingham?
I don't think they can be fully reconciled, honestly. I think they just have to coexist. And as a listener, you have to sort of hold both ideas at the same time. You have to accept the music for its undeniable power and beauty, while also acknowledging the profound flaws of the vessel it came through.
That is a lot to chew on. So here's a final thought for you. The next time you hear the opening riff of Layla, I want you to listen to it differently. Don't just hear the classic rock anthem that's on every movie soundtrack.
Hear the context.
Hear the context. Hear the desperation. Hear the unrequited love for his best friend's wife. Hear the ghost of Duane Allman's slide guitar. And remember the chaotic, brilliant, and deeply troubled life that fueled every single note of it.
It definitely adds a whole new layer to the track when you know the story.
That's all for this deep dive. Thanks for listening and keep exploring.
See you next time.